Welcome to the Introduction to Criminal Liability, looking at legal research, Maryland, and federal case reporters. Now, part of understanding a statutory citation is understanding which court the case was in front of just by looking at it. Now, if we see here, we have Schneckloth versus Bustamante, 412 U.S. 218, 219, 1973. Just by looking at the U.S., we know this is from the United States Supreme Court because that is the United States reporter. There are other courts that have other reporters, and we're going to look at a few of them now. Now, the United States Supreme Court, as you might imagine, a lot of people are interested in publishing their opinions. So you have the United States reports, that's where you'll see the U.S. You have the Supreme Court reporter, which is the West publisher. Remember we looked at Westlaw before, all right? And that version is going to be SCT, all right? That is the Supreme Court reporter. You also have the Lexis Lawyers Edition, and that's going to be LED. And if you see these US, SCT, or LED, all of those mean United States Supreme Court. In some books and some opinions, you might see them all strung together. So Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, you can find it in the US reporter, you can find it in the SCT reporter, and you can find it in the LED reporter. Now, the one that we usually care about for the Supreme Court is the US. We don't usually care about the others, but good to know. So if you see US in the middle, you know it is a United States Supreme Court case. Now, the next level down in the federal system, you have the Federal Courts of Appeals. The Federal Courts of Appeals broken down into different circuits, but they are all found in the same reporter. So the federal reporter is just an F. Now, there are a bunch of circuits, and there have been a bunch of years that these circuits have been around, so the F has gone to a second series and then to a third series. So, because you can't tell which court of appeal wrote the opinion, lawyers or judges or whoever's writing the case will add a third circuit, or whichever circuit it is, as well as the year. That way people know that it was the third circuit. So if you see US, you know it was the United States Supreme Court. If you see an F, you don't know which court of appeals it was, and so you'll have it added at the end. Federal district courts will be F sup. And again, there are a lot of district courts. They've been around for a lot of years, so that has gone to a second series also. So if you see F sup, that means it is a federal district court opinion. Now what about Maryland? Well, Maryland Court of Appeals, you have the Maryland reports, and that is going to be an MD. So if you see an MD in the middle, you know it is a Maryland Court of Appeals opinion. And then you have the Maryland Appellate Reports. So if you see MD APP, you know it is a Court of Special Appeals opinion. You can also find Maryland cases in the Atlantic Reporter. So if you see an A, that means it's one of either the Court of Appeals or the Court of Special Appeals, or one of several other states, because the Atlantic Reporter reports on a number of different states. So if you see something like this, State versus Wallace, 372 Maryland 137, 144, 812 Atlantic 2nd, 291, 295, 2002. Let's break that down real quick. Well, the first word is the point that brings it before the court. Now, which court? Well, we see an MD in the middle, and so it's the Maryland Court of Appeals. So the state of Maryland brought this case to the Maryland Court of Appeals. The person responding to this case, right, that's the second one, that's Wallace. Wallace responded in the Court of Appeals. We don't know which one brought the case to begin with. Well, we do, because it's probably a criminal case, in which case it's always the state bringing the charges at trial. But if it was a civil case, we wouldn't know just based on the order of the names who had actually brought it. So which reporter is it in? Well, we see it's an MD, so you have the Maryland reports, and you also see the A, so it's also in the Atlantic reports. Now, which volume of the Maryland reports? Well, it's the 372nd volume of the Maryland reports. And if you turn to page 137, you will find the beginning of this case. So 372 Maryland 137 is the beginning of this case. Now, there must have been some quote or some legal rule cited, because we see which page number it can be found on, and that page is 144. So if you turn to page 144 of the 372nd volume of the Maryland reports, you will find State versus Wallace. This case can also be found in the 812th volume of the Atlantic 2nd Reporter. On page 291 is where it begins. And the 2002 is the year that the Maryland Court of Appeals laid down their opinions when they published their opinion. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye now.